Hi, and welcome to Braising, and today we're going to be working with beef. So in an earlier video we trimmed down a top round and we cut it down into two things. We cut it down into some stew meat as well as whole pieces of meat that we're going to do the braising technique on today. So here's the meat from an earlier video, and I have my pan warming up here. I've got it over medium-high heat right now, and the pan is starting to warm up. And now we're going to season the meat. So I've got some salt and pepper here. I like to sprinkle a little bit high, that way we get it even, we don't get pockets of pepper on the meat. Some salt. You could add other ingredients that you prefer, like garlic powder. Flip it over. Season the other side. You always want to season your meat before you sear. In the braising technique, it's called the combination cooking method, and the reason it's called the combination cooking method is that you're using two styles of cooking. One is dry heat and the other one is moist heat that you've learned about earlier on. So dry heat, we use air or oil to cook with in all of our dry heat cooking methods, and moist heat cooking method, as the name would suggest, we're using a water-based item. So in this situation we're going to start by searing it in hot oil, and then it will continue cooking in its next stage in a nice flavorful liquid. So I have it seasoned about where I want to season it. I'm going to add a little bit of fresh chopped garlic to it. I'm going to rub that in because it's going to have a tendency of falling off. And I'm going to add a little bit of garlic into the stock too, because when you sear it, it helps really kind of cauterize it on the meat a little bit better, but some of it's certainly going to fall off into your liquid. You want a nice small mince on this. You don't want it too big. You don't have fresh garlic. You can easily substitute garlic powder for this step. And now we're ready. So your first step is to heat the pan. So I've got the pan pretty hot right now. Like I said, medium-high heat. That's going to be adjustable at home, whether you're cooking with gas or whether you're cooking with electric. So today I'm using electric. So as the pan is nice, good and hot right now, I'm now going to add the vegetable oil. And I'm going to add just enough to coat the pan. So if your pan size is a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, you might need to adjust the amount of oil you have here. So I have a couple of tablespoons of oil. I'm just going to put about half this in there. So I got about a tablespoon. And you can tell your pan's pretty good and hot when you get a nice little slight bubble as soon as it goes in there. You don't want to see something big. You don't want it popping everywhere. And then we're going to let the oil heat up just a little bit before we put the meat in. And what that does is, based on the type of pan, it's going to help fill in the gaps in the pan. As the pan heats up, the pores open up a little bit and it can fill those in. And it also will cauterize the meat right away and sear the meat right away, so the juices don't go down in those little open holes. So I've got it pretty good and hot. I can tell because there's a little bit of a swirling look to the oil in the pan. We don't want it so hot that it's going to smoke. And now I'm going to add the meat. And you don't want the meat really wet when it goes in. You want to have fairly dry meat. So sometimes when I sear other meats that are really damp, like maybe a scallop, I'm going to pat those dry with a paper towel before I put them in the pan. You should hear that nice sizzle as it goes in. So I don't have smoke coming off the pan. This is actual steam right now, and that's exactly what you want. And I'm going to let this sit there and get a nice brown color for a few minutes before I flip it. And if you're just not sure, you can, take your tongs, lift it up, and look at the meat and see how it's doing. But when you make a brown braise, you want to make sure you get good color on your meat. The color is the Maillard reaction, and that's what's going to get some additional flavor to it. You may do white braises or white stews, and in that situation you would not brown the meat at all. But traditionally, for something like pot roast, we typically brown the meat. It's going to have better color in the sauce. It's going to have better flavor overall, as well as on the meat itself. The other thing that you don't want to do when you're trying to brown meat, you don't want to really overcrowd the pan too much. So this is about the maximum on this pan. You probably even go a little bit larger. This is just working well for the video. Because when you get so much meat in the pan that all the liquid starts to release and you start getting a ton of steam off of it, you're actually boiling the meat, and that's not ideal. That happens a lot when you're cooking stews sometimes. We tend to put too much stew in there. So generally you want just enough, have a little bit of space in the pan, and brown to get some good color. So we're going to let that sear. We'll come back in just a minute, flip the meat over, and continue this process.